Well, thank you for giving me a couple of minutes to share a story with you. Got a really encouraging one coming up. A man named Paul whose life was changed. Speaking of Paul's, I've been reading Acts lately. Not the first time, I've read Acts many times, but it's always interesting how new things pop out when you read the scriptures and dwell on them. And I find sometimes it's when you read a different translation. I have here the easy to read version. This is a Bible that was given to me by a friend. Not the version I normally read, but I picked this up the other day and it just spoke to me in a fresh way. This is from Acts chapter 17. Paul speaking here in Athens, a very secular place, much like Australia really, secular in a whole lot of ways. We like to think about different philosophies and argue the toss on all sorts of things. That's what they like to do. And so here he is speaking to them and he said, God wanted people to look to him, and perhaps in searching all around for him, they would find him. But he is not far from any of us. Now that little statement, I think, is an absolute gem. God is not far from any of us. And that's what I love about what we do here at Vision together. We help people look to God. He's not far from us, but we just let all sorts of stuff get in the way. And Vision helps to get in the middle, turn people's thought upward, toward God, toward the scriptures, toward his way of thinking. And we do that with your support. So can I just say a hearty thank you if you're a Vision supporter. You enable the kinds of stories that you're about to hear to happen. And also, if you haven't yet, it's a great time to support Vision before the end of the financial year. It's not far away. Of course, it's tax deductible. So now's a good time, if you haven't already, to give a gift toward Vision as part of our mid-year appeal. And of course, if you've already done so, we're so grateful to have you with us on this wonderful mission we have to take the gospel to every corner of Australia, make it available for anybody who wants to hear it. So let's hear this story. It's a really encouraging one. Came in just a week ago. Here it is.
Now, Peter, your story just blew us away. How God has been using, not just, His word and everything in your life, but also Vision in your life. There, just give us a little bit of the background of your story, where it all started from.
My story starts with my dad being an elder in a church, and we grew up in that church. And then I got baptised, and just after that, my dad took my mum's life. And as you can imagine, that just burnt the bridge of faith to below the waterline for me.
Yeah.
And so the Lord reached out to me in his faithfulness. I walked past a church when I was 18 and he spoke to me as clearly as I'm speaking to you, and he said, I'm going to put you in this church.
Wow.
And then 10 years went past. I was very stubborn, I guess. I was hurting a lot, and He brought me back to that exact church 10 years later and said, I told you I was going to bring you here to meet a dear young man who I saw the love of Christ in. And the Lord reminded me that I'd shook hands with him 6 years earlier and said, somehow, some way, I hope I'll get to see you again. And so it was like the beginning of a surrender for me, and it was like, for me, the Lord was fulfilling Philippians 1:6, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you, he will carry it on to completion. So the Lord did that in me, and since then he's just continued to show himself faithful. And for me, I picked up Vision through one of my brothers. He encouraged me to start listening to Vision, and I just found the program was so good. And I've just continued to walk that walk.
You were having a chat off microphone before. You were talking about Vision being like a platform for you underneath your feet, giving you the stability to do the big things that God is asking you to do. One of those big things that I know it's really, this is like mind-blowing for a lot of people, is what God did in your heart with your relationship with your father.
Yeah, well, my relationship with my dad, one day I was walking through a 10-ton crane bay, and the Lord spoke to me and said, you got to find your dad. And I said, I found him 2 years ago. I don't want to see him again. And he said, no, you got to find him again. And I found him in the hospital, in the intensive heart care ward. And the Lord was gracious and got him well enough that I could spend some time with him. I took him home on some weekends, and I took him to church, the church that I'd been going to for about 12 years at that time. So they were my really close family. And they knew his background and were so accepting and so loving. And I sat him down one weekend for him to tell me what he wanted for his funeral while he could still speak, because he couldn't write anymore. And we recorded that. And then he said he'd like to be buried in the same plot as my mother.
Oh, Peter.
So was his wish, and that's where he's buried. So, but the platform, I used to work in an industry where we used to use 200 and 300 ton cranes and to lift heavy items onto sites that were sometimes very awkward. And if you draw that sort of thing, those cranes, they put out big legs a long way to keep the stability, so when they reach and ride out, the crane doesn't tip over. And for me, that's sort of what vision does for me. It's a couple of those big arms that reach out, and I can draw from the teachings that I hear, and I can draw from the beautiful music that I listen to that just ministers to my soul and keeps me filled up, so that when I go out and I reach out to drug addicts and alcoholics and blokes that have been in prison and people that are hurting, my tank is filled so that I can keep going.
What an incredible story. I know there are people listening around Australia right now, and all of us are saying, well, you had every right not to forgive. If anybody should not forgive, it should be Peter. I mean, what he's been through. Where does that forgiveness, where do you get the strength and the power from to go in there and face your dad and forgive him?
That was the Lord. That was all it could be. I was very, very blessed to be able to do a successful stress management program in the first couple of years of going to church when I got reinstated into a church. And it was a beautiful program. It really centered heavily on loving people and forgiving people. And I'll just like to make a little quote from one of the pages, and it's by Dr. Sam Peoples Jr., and he said, "The circumstances in life, the events of life, the people around me in life do not make me the way I am, but reveal the way I am." And I endeavoured to take on board a lot of the material, which was all biblical, from that program, and run with that, because I knew I needed to be healed. And I could only do that as I stepped in and took action and went forward. And I just thought, you're just so good, Lord.
Peter, that's just like God's love in action, isn't it? Which is what we're all about here. But I love your analogy that you came in with. You said God gave it to you, of you being steadfast. You're sowing, your feet are firm down in the ground, and therefore you can actually go and be the hands and feet of God now. And you're going back into prisons, and you're able to go out and be that love in action because you're so strong in the Lord. Peter, thank you for encouraging us this morning.
Yeah.
It's lovely to be with you.